Hey guys, Veebat here with another V Plays, and we're taking out the acclaimed XF5U Tier 8 American Heavy Fighter. This aircraft has been known throughout the history of the game as being one of the weirdest looking aircraft, and believe it or not, it actually existed and flew. We've done a review of this a while ago, back when this aircraft was arguably pretty overpowered. But as time has gone on, the nerf bat has hit this aircraft pretty hard, and a lot of people have been asking me, hey V, how should I be flying the XF5U with the changes to the aircraft performance? Well, the real answer is you pretty much fly it the way that you would fly any other heavy fighter. I actually found a lot of comparisons to the XP58 and the way that the aircraft flies. The problem here is that it obviously doesn't have the same guns and it doesn't have a tail gunner. So there are some major changes there, but the maneuverability is pretty similar. The climb rate on this actually beats it out easily. The 20mm cannons, however, are different. It doesn't have the blurp damage, but it definitely has the potential to knock out a light fighter in a single pass, and it's a little bit easier to gauge that lead to be able to get those rounds on target. Now, this is going to probably be argumentative and a little bit weird, but I've actually opted to put on here gas-operated action. For any of you who've gotten this aircraft and have the 20mm cannons, you'll note that the number one problem is that they overheat too quickly. That's okay. The cannons on this actually fire faster than any other 20mm cannons that we've had available up until this point, and all the way through 10 for the American line, in fact. So these 20mm cannons, their real strength is going to be that burst damage. So let's augment the strength by going ahead and putting on gas-operated action, and it allows us to be able to really get the damage out on these aircraft. So even in that brushing pass, we got a few hits on that aircraft, but it was real momentary, and we had to be very careful because that 262 could have easily gotten rockets on us if he happened to be loaded with them. Now, it does still overheat, and hitting a heavier hit point aircraft like this, it takes a minute to find the sweet spot, and you got to close in a little bit further because it hurts the accuracy. So we're kind of losing on two fronts, but when we talk about raw damage potential on a brushing pass, we're looking pretty good. The other nice advantage here is that with 20mm cannons, you have an innate ability to get a good critical chance, and you're actually getting more rounds out than you would with any of the other 20mm cannon setups that you'll see with the American lines, so your chances of getting a critical are going to be that much better. At least that's the way I understand it. There's an F7F up there. I thought it might have been the 262. But we're going to go ahead and vector for him after the TU2 was taken out. The F7F, it's going to be a little bit easier to go after. Obviously, a tier below, it will be able to outpace it, will be able to outclimb it, will definitely be able to outturn it, so not as much of a worry for us. The altitude limitation on this aircraft is pretty bad. As you can see here, it's going to be equivalent to that of the 1056, and you guys kind of saw that on the original spread there for our bug splats. But we're going to just drop our munitions here, and we're just going to vector our way out of the area. The aircraft, since it does have a really good climb rate, it allows it to be able to jump above its normal altitude block a little bit easier, and that allows me to just be able to take out threats that are going to be up that way, which there's going to be a few, especially when you're talking about the Tier 8 German bombers. Speak of the devil here, we've got the 288A Tier 7. We're coming up from underneath him, we're getting those guns on target. The rate of climb on this aircraft with the current setup I have is, I think it's 478 feet per second. That is pretty impressive. Now, I'm not going to let that 262 straight head on me, but what I am going to do is I'm going to try and turn on him, which is what I should be doing in this aircraft. But immediately he went up a little bit, so we're going to have to come out of our comfort zone and get underneath this aircraft and try and get guns on target. Thankfully, he's diving back down, and trigger discipline, trigger discipline, trigger discipline. Letting those guns cool down a little bit, throwing a few more volleys out there, and we took him out. Shout out from Thor. Thanks, Thor. We're going to head over here and go after these bomber flight as they're coming in. Obviously, it's a juicy target for a heavy fighter. We've already got the missile facility, we've already got the command center, and we've got the airfield. So might as well rack up some free points here because I really don't want to capture the enemy command center at this point because there's a supremacy, go figure, isn't really going to be helping us out point spread wise, but this is still a very viable tactic for a heavy fighter to go and do. And as you can see here, the overheating on the guns, again, against higher hit point targets becomes a little bit troublesome. But if you want to talk about an aircraft that can come in and boom and zoom on a light fighter at lower altitude or even a multi-role, we'll be able to cause some serious damage, and as you saw it there, we were able to get some crits out on the target as well. Decided I'm going to make my way over to the military facility. At this point, I've kind of chalked the game up as a win for us. It would be great if they were able to take one of these sites, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. The bombs on this, again, they are on here because I had a series of some pretty bad losses with this aircraft, believe it or not. Well, I'm sure a bunch of you do believe it. This morning, I think I had 5 losses in a row in this aircraft. I am going to say, though, that 2 of those losses, I had gotten over 1,600 personal points, and one of those I actually got a grade 1 in, and we still managed to lose the battle. In fact, one of them was lost to Rumple. It was a very close match, and it was 5 points away from one another, so a good loss if I'd consider it that. But I don't think any of those losses were a fault of the plane. Clearly, we did our fair share in that battle, so really the argument could just be drawn that it was a little bit of bad luck. But, you know, you decide based on what the information I've given you. 9,000 personal points. Ooh, not very nice, Thor. But 9,000 personal points in a 6-minute match, that is not a bad result for us. So let's go ahead and get to the endgame results, and we'll talk a little bit more about the equipment loadout and how I feel that this aircraft compares to some of the other Tier 8 heavy fighters. Alright, not bad. As far as I'm concerned, a typical battle is usually about 9,000 personal points for me. Anything above that is just icing on the cake, so anywhere from 9 to 11 I consider to be average. Usually, if you're in a battle that lasts a longer period of time, I would expect the average player to be getting at least 7,000 personal points. That kind of hits that threshold of we're really contributing to the match. But anything above 5, I'd say you should be happy about when you're in this tier bracket. But, you know, that's all going to be dependent on you and where your skills really lie. And as you can see here, this battle was only 6 minutes. So we ended up doing fairly well. I'm sure that if the enemy team had kept one of their zones and we didn't air supremacy, we probably would have been able to get much better point spread on this. But unfortunately, that wasn't quite the case. I still think it's an accurate example of how to fly this aircraft effectively. You just can't think of it as the I win button that it used to be in the past, where you could maneuver on most heavy fight. You could maneuver on every heavy fighter, and you had the ability to really be able to do that up and overturn much earlier. But I feel as though the maneuverability envelope has been shrunk. So with the maneuverability envelope shrunk, it means that you actually got to slow the aircraft down a lot more in order to be able to get that up and overturn started, because you can see here that you'd have to be below 447, but the aircraft easily gets above that 440 when you start hitting that boost. The good news is the aircraft is actually really good at low speeds anyways. You can keep this aircraft airborne as long as you're above 50 miles an hour. When it comes to the equipment, there's going to be probably some debate here, but I went with the gas-operated action. I have tried all 3. I have tried going with the bolt carriers, I've tried going with the long barrels. I found the gas-operated action worked best for me, especially with the way that I play. I do a lot of boom and zoom. I like to get passing glances on the targets, and the gas-operated action allows me to be able to get as many rounds on target as quickly as possible. One of the major strengths of this airframe is going to be the rate of fire. When you start talking about heavy aircraft, like even at Tier 9 and Tier 10, these guns, the Mark 12s, which coincidentally are on the F6U as well, are going to be identical guns to what you see on the F2H and the XF90. But then when you take a look at the 20mm cannons here, these Mark 30 or M39s, not Mark, but M39s, you can see that the rate of fire is actually going to be 100 more rounds per minute. It doesn't seem like much, but when you compare it to a set of 50 cals, you can see it's only 100 less, so it's somewhere in between. So your real claim to fame with this aircraft is already going to be the burst damage once you get the 20s unlocked for this airframe, which should be a major priority, by the way. Once you get these 20s, you'll note that they overheat very quickly, but that's fine. You just account for it. You burst those shots, and you get those cannons to hit, and when they do, you can attrit big chunks of health away from the enemy. Adding insult to injury, you already have a pretty good crit chance with the cannons, so now that you're firing even faster, every hit has a potential for causing a crit. Now you're just magnifying that by having multiple rounds hit the target all at one time. So just something to think about, and why I think gas-operated action is a solid choice. So there we go. I have actually rolled for cooldown rate on this as well because it helps. Yeah, it's still going to overheat really quickly, but when I let off the trigger, it cools down that much faster. It doesn't seem like much, but it definitely feels like it's working to me. I originally went with lightweight power unit, believe it or not, and the thing was pretty maneuverable, and I was able to get around on aircraft like the XP58, which is fairly maneuverable for a tier 8 heavy, but it didn't need it. There was very seldom that I find myself in a situation where I needed to try and outmaneuver another heavy. I was able to do it already. So it still has that capability and is still the most maneuverable heavy at tier 8. So I decided to go with the combined boost injection, and it's actually been working out pretty well for me. I do like that this aircraft's other strength is going to be the incredible climb performance. You can see that the climb rate here is going to be 478. That's incredible. And when you compare that to something like the XP58, its climb rate is only 378. So by putting on the high-speed gas turbine, it actually increases that a little bit more. So that's where we're getting a lot of that extra performance out of the aircraft. I mean, but look at it, right? It has propellers on here that are reminiscent of the Osprey, which is the American tilt rotor aircraft. In fact, there were previous iterations of that tilt rotor aircraft that were developed in the 50s and 60s that were using a lot of what was discovered in the development of this aircraft as kind of the groundwork to get those other aircraft up and running as well. So yes, this aircraft was built for lift and built for climb rate, so they've represented that in the game, and I feel as though they've done that fairly accurately. I'm not sure what I would do if I specialized this airframe. You can see we have 5 marks on the aircraft. I put a lot of miles on this thing back when it was the premier aircraft in the game, but we did not have the specialization option available at the time that we were flying it. So we got a lot of marks, but we just aren't quite there. We just got to participate in capturing some sectors, which is why I put air-to-ground ordnance on it. I prefer the 1,000-pound bombs, and yes, I've gone with a squirrel paint job, so I consider these the squirrel nuts. We're dropping our acorns on the enemy. These are going to be the best bang for your buck, pun intended. 6,000 damage, 295-foot blast radius. It's 180-second reload time, so it's up to you whether or not you want to put these on. It does cost you airspeed. However, if you're a fan of air-to-ground rockets and you've unlocked the Tiny Tims at some point, these are fun. They have a really far range on them for as far as rockets go. You can fire them out to 5,600 feet and some change, so you don't need to be right on top of the target when you launch these. They do less overall damage than the 1,000-pounders and have a smaller blast radius, but as far as rockets go, it's a huge blast radius, 230 feet. In fact, if you compare it to a 500-pound bomb, it's a very comparable blast radius between 230 and 246. What I like to do with Tiny Tims every so often is they can be really good for firing underneath ground attackers, and the blast radius will destroy the other aircraft. You can do the same thing with 1,000-pounders, however, the Tiny Tims are going to move much quicker, so it's a lot easier to gauge that lead time. So, you know, you choose what you want to do, and if I'm not mistaken, I think it actually counts as a rocketeer when you do it. No guarantees, but when it happens, you feel really good about it. The XF5U, it doesn't fly like it used to, but it doesn't mean it's a bad aircraft. It just takes a little bit of getting used to, especially coming off of an aircraft like the F7F, which had almost no maneuverability, and then you get into this thing, and it favors maneuverability and has a really good climb rate. Most of the time people struggle in this aircraft because they got to get through these 650 cal machine guns, which are unique to the airframe, so you have to go through the first and second set. It is going to be a painful time, but I tell everybody, put all of your effort into getting those 20mm cannons, because once you get those, then you start to discover where the aircraft's real strength is, and it's going to come in that burst damage. Gas operated action, it's been working for me. You guys tell me what works for you, but I tried the long barrels, I just wasn't getting good enough hit reg for the amount of fire that I was getting out of the guns. By the time I found the sweet spot, I was overheated. So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll catch you on the next one.